everyone. Episode 21 of Around the Bend podcast. We have the pleasure of having Kirby Aragon, head of IT over at Benchling here in the Bay Area, like myself. How are you doing, Kirby?
Good, man. How are you doing today?
Doing great. It was kind of interesting because we had a talk a couple weeks back, and you have an issue that really a lot of my clients have had an issue that even our organization I work in at Robert Half has had an issue, which everyone can relate to, which is tech debt. It's sort of this all-encompassing subject that everyone throws around, but nobody really has a clear guideline of how do you measure it, how do you deal with it, and then how do you overcome it. And I think you kind of sitting in the seat and kind of your past experience with other Bay Area software companies probably have a little bit better understanding and, some good stories you told me. So I thought it would be a good learning lesson for everybody to hear about it.
Yeah. I appreciate the intro there, Blake. Very excited to be here and kind of talk about something that I think has impacted a lot of my work from now and all my previous adventures here in Silicon Valley. But yeah, technical debt I think really kind of bleeds into two parts, which is really the identification of technical debt, and then we have the prioritization of really thinking what that technical debt is. And then to add another layer of complexity there is that I feel like there are different stages that you, I would say, experience technical debt from a Series A stage to a Series B, Series D, and then F, and so on. And I think like the big piece of the snowball effect, kind of what we were kind of just talking about, is it kind of starts when you're like a Series A company and you're just trying to move fast and
Mm-hmm.
break stuff. And I remember like at Netflix working there, and
Oh.
that was one of the mottos as well, was like move fast and break stuff, right? And it was
Mm-hmm.
always that in the very early stage. And then when you got to the later stages, as each organization started to grow, it became more and more methodical of like, can we afford technical debt? And you had all the
Yeah.
maturity behind that to really, I would say, make a great analysis, have somewhat of a structure or process behind it, which
Mm-hmm.
then I would say alleviate a little bit of that snowball. It was still there, but it was very difficult for it to kind of grow larger and larger once the organization matured, is the best way to put it.
So I guess like is there like an actual evaluation point, or is it just like a continual thing that just kind of happens?
Yeah. I think a couple of things kind of happen and take into place, but I would say it's a continual thing that definitely happens over time. An interesting part, at least from my experience with various, I would say, experiences in the startup world, is Series A to Series C. You kind of get to a point where there's somewhat of a structure. People bring in, I would say, their tribal knowledge from past experiences and try to build some sort of stage, phase, and process.
Mm-hmm.
And then what eventually happens is from a C standpoint to like going on further in stages. I like to call it like the awkward stage where you're like that middle school kid trying to fit into high school clothes.
Yeah.
And so all of that technical that kind of built up from before, I would say starts to kind of either roll away because newer technology or newer processes kind of evolve. And
Mm-hmm.
then on the other part of that is it's just continuing taking on some of this tech debt. And I think like a great example there is like the back of house of operations, where inventory, IT management, like asset management itself, is something that always falls on the back burner. It gets deprioritized over time.
Yeah.
Audits, onboarding, offboarding, all those things kind of take into place. And then what happens is you're left with a huge pile of laptops in the bottom of your basement. So
Well,
another a great example of technical debt there.
it's true. I mean, I remember when I first started working here, because post COVID they changed so much of the office infrastructure. There was like a Costco pallet box full of
Yeah,
the old landlines and old headsets, but like a mountain at our San Jose office, and I was just like, what do you even like? You can't throw that away. Like, what do you even do? It's like physically just like, what do you do with it, kind of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of funny, and like I can kind of bring up other examples where like even the onboarding process itself. A clear example here is we took our time in building a process for just intake, which
Mm.
caused a lot of problems in the early days. So, to give an example of us taking on technical debt in the very early days, it took us almost 45 minutes to an hour and a half per each employee to onboard. And that includes
Okay.
from candidate to new hire, from new hire to like first day at the office. It took us a while. And then I want to say previously before that, as I consulted with other companies in their very early stage, it was very much the same thing. Trying to just come up with a proper intake process from candidate to new hire, and then build somewhat of a great spreadsheet that other people can follow, or other organizations such as IT, HR, workplace. And then it kind of rippled and snowballed into this big thing. Whereas even today, I would say here we have issues with like contractors and trying
Hmm.
to I would say properly follow the compliance, what controls we set, and whatnot. And so a little bit of the after effect of some of the technical debt we took on from the early days of just even trying to iron out the onboarding process. It happens.
Well, it definitely too. There's so many like moving parts, and if something goes wrong, especially with those access privileges, like somebody coming on given too much or too little, or vice versa when they're leaving, maybe not on their own accord. You want to make sure that things are processed correctly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you bring up a really good point, like addressing the technical debt. And so like for us, it's changed a little bit as well. I want to say in the very early days, it was easily addressed because something blew up, right? We got an escalation, someone didn't get a laptop, whatever. And then when it later on in the stages, we were finally able to have like data points, right? And like really building the narrative around those data points, and then trying to figure out where are some of these gaps we can kind of fulfill. And then now taking on technical debt became a little bit easier.
Hmm.
So again, going back to like the different stages, when you're in the early stage, you kind of don't have a forecast of what the next few months are going to look like.
Hmm.
And then from there, you start to kind of address it as, okay, great, I know what's upcoming. And then now I'm talking about the later stages. I know what's upcoming. How do I bleed that into the rest of my quarterly planning or the rest of my yearly planning
Hmm.
and whatnot? And then from that, I want to say that the added layer piece on the layer stage side is now you have like a huge team or somewhat of a team established before or then before. So
Hmm.
now you're like playing the integral parts of like building the muscle to be able to take on technical debt, and then also be proactive and preventative and whatnot.
And that's kind of a hard process to kind of set up. Like, hey, how do
Absolutely.
you manage, and then how do you get rid of, and then how do you like prevent, because you have to do all three, because it's
Yep.
all happening simultaneously. Like, I guess as a director of IT, what are your like number one, like, hey, we gotta solve this, like, we can't let this technical kind of debt stay. Like, what would you say? Would that be like hardware or software, or where does that kind of
Yeah.
fall?
And that I think for me at least in my experience, especially here at Benchling and how I saw it kind of address at Slack, it started off with just audits, like us trying to follow certain controls and kind of lead us into the guidelines of keeping up with that compliance is what kind of caused us to focus in on some of that technical debt. And
Okay.
then as you mature, I would say in the later stages, your technical debt becomes more system integrated. So now I'm imagining a team in which like you have a business technology applications team, you have a
Hmm.
business technology engineering team, and you have a business technology operations team. And now that they're all working together, I kind of put it as I love making this example, but it's kind of like a triangle where it's like you have like leadership, you have IT engineering and applications, and then you have operations and support. But it's
Hmm.
kind of like a funnel, or you flip the pyramid upside down and it becomes a funnel. And
Uh-huh.
then from there, what happens is your intake is really coming from help desk, or your intake is coming from your organization, your business, and whatnot. And then from there, you start to follow trends. You have data, you have forecasting that can kind of help be data points or like milestones for you to help be a little bit more preventative. And then
Hmm.
it finally kind of goes down to funnel into engineering and applications to help build systems and system administration to kind of help build process. And then you
Hmm.
have leadership there who really kind of takes the tail end of it and then starts to put that into their quarterly planning, their fiscal planning, their 2 year, 5 year planning
Hmm.
is where I've seen it evolve. And so it kind of changes over time is the best way to put it of how technical debt is identified,
Hmm.
prioritized, and then addressed through the process.
It's definitely
I threw a
a
lot at you, Blake. Sorry.
no, 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 no. It's okay. I mean, it's a good. It's just like once you go into one thing, it brings up other, other stuff as well. And I think the just kind of thinking about all those different steps, it sounds like, do you guys have like a certain standard you run by? Like, I know that for certain things, there's certain security standards, but is there certain, like, I don't know, industry standards you try to stick by in terms of age of certain things? Or is it just, I think we've talked about this before too. There's really no set standard for how to quantify the technical debt to begin with. Maybe there's some standards of like product age and usefulness and things like that. But I was talking to one guy in our consulting division, one managing director, and he's like, if somebody could solve that problem, they would be very wealthy, and that company that figured that out would be, the busiest company ever, probably.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's like $1 million idea right there. I think there are definitely tons of different methods, which is probably why it's hard to kind of really
Yeah.
centralize that. But I think that the best thing to put it is what worked well for us, especially I would say here in my experience at Benchling, is we had the vision from the very beginning. And I think having that vision from the very beginning of understanding where our past experiences were from, where we knew we needed to grow, where I would say gaps and areas of improvement we needed to have from a compliance standpoint are like really took into play on how we built out and planned out the rest of our quarters and our fiscal years. And that kind of helped with technical debt, I would say.
Mhm.
And then now I would say we're kind of in that middle boat. We're still that I would awkward middle school child entering
Mhm.
into high school, trying to mature the processes because we're now in a later stage. And so
Mhm.
here I think we do a great we have the muscle to really identify the technical debt and where that leads into, but then now we're trying to address and build a muscle for prioritization.
Mhm.
And when are we able to squeeze that in? And I want to say based on like our previous conversations on like how the times have changed post pandemic world, this current market condition we're in, we've
Uh-huh.
had to I would say rethink the way we prioritize things, which is kind of I would say a another big road bump to why
Yeah.
we're still maturing our process and building that muscle for us.
Well, also too, I mean, a lot of companies, especially up and coming startups, you mentioned, being through the A, B, C, D rounds. Like in the past, they maybe had so much investor money, they're like, oh, screw it. Like, let's just get to the new stuff. Let's hire the contractors. Let's bring in the consultants. Let's just like, bam, let's upgrade it all. We're good. Don't worry about it. Now it's like you still have the same problems, but you don't have the same money that you did, and you just gotta be cost effective and figure it out. Like a lot of people I know and my clients are like, yeah, they literally just said, this is your budget and that's it. And yeah, that's it. Like, they're like, but we can't get this done. They're like, figure out the next best thing. That's what you got.
Yeah.
And that's the
I think
attitude. Yeah.
or go ahead, sorry. No, I
No,
was
no,
gonna
you
say
go for it.
I think my favorite term that I've been hearing around the office is let's be creative, right? And
Hmm.
so like that's kind of the term that's being thrown out there. But it is a mindset change. And it's kind of I think what's funny is it's kind of going back to what I said of how the snowball kind of grows through the different stages and then how you kind of reel it back. It's almost the same thing of like, great, you're at a later stage. Now flip your mindset back to when it was the early stage where you needed to be scrappy
Yeah.
and where you needed to and here I think what's unique and this is like the golden opportunity of ours and I feel like everywhere else at any IT organization is especially at these times is like you're at this point where you're being scrappy but because you have a forecast because you kind of know where things have been the last few years and where it's leading to can you be a little bit more methodical and be a little bit more strategic as you go so you go from like being scrappy and break stuff to or moving fast and breaking stuff to moving fast but being very methodical with what the next 3 weeks or the next quarter is going to look like not necessarily the next 2 quarters or the next month and whatnot or next
Exactly.
year.
I mean, absolutely. And it's kind of tough too, because like some things that have to be done require certain expensive processes or certain knowledge or just certain hands to come on to make things switch over, that if you're doing your normal day-to-day job that takes 40 hours a week, you can't expect your current staff to then go
Yep.
do double the work at the same pay, so like how do you get creative when you're constrained by just the actual limitation of you only have so big of a team. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of folks have been hit by rounds of layoffs and things like that. So the
Yeah.
thing I see
Yeah.
that's most ironic is that, it's like, I get it. There's financial constraints. Like people, like a company can only do so much or they'll just not exist anymore. But it's like it's like you're driving your car up a hill because, like, let's say you have a big project coming up and it's a 6-cylinder car, but now it's a 4-cylinder because you swapped out the engine at the last second. So you're like kind of really pushing up that hill really hard where you were kind of prepared to go up the hill, but now you're not prepared to go up the hill. And
Yeah.
you have the same work with way less power and no support that's going to be coming in to help you.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really great point. I think like every team I've talked to or have socialized this with is feeling that same exact kind of pain. Versus before, I would say in a different market condition where it was easy to kind of relay the importance of I would say support or resources, and
Mm-hmm.
then have the plan to kind of build that out versus now. I think for us is we've definitely experienced that. This year, we did have layoffs earlier in the year that did impact teams like IT, and then the big one for us, I think that kind of helped bring in stuff and also kind of tying in the technical debt is I want to say for at least us in IT, we're now called business technology. So I'm going
Mm.
to refer us as BT.
It's
So
okay.
BT, essentially, we have two teams that operate almost within the same flavors, the operational side and the engineering side. And so both teams were impacted with Rift. And for us, where we got creative was a couple other things. We took a step back. Instead of operating as two separate teams, we brought both teams together. And that brought us closer together when it came to planning and prioritization. And I think that was a huge impact on being able to drive and help the team feel like we have a vision going forward. Because what happens is we're kind of pushing forward, and then a rift happened, and then like you kind of feel like a rewind. And so a lot of
Mm.
folks felt like we were kind of taking two steps back. And so for us is how do we take what we have? How do we get us as a team more aligned so we can better prioritize and not have to feel the heavy burden
Mm-hmm.
of taking on more stuff or having to be creative with taking on more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say in these last few quarters, it's going to show that we've definitely taken on more interesting, more impactful work to the business in the last few months and have been able to really hit it home. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've prioritized a little bit better. We've put somewhat forth and it's not there yet, right? Like I said, we're still building muscle. We're still trying to mature this process, but
Mm-hmm.
it got us somewhat to a point where we had a clear vision of like where our milestones were, where our targets were, and how we needed to get there. And it all kind of fell into its place these last few quarters. And now we're building on top of that, which is part of, I would say, our rebrand to business technology and really being more proactive for the company and getting to the preventative point of technical debt and whatnot.
Do you see, because I'm noticing that that name change a lot, it's not IT, it's BT. Like, is there a methodology switch or is it just on paper? Like, is it just a title switch in, yeah, I'd say like in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, yeah. I think as an industry in a whole, it's definitely been a trend, and I want to bring it back to um, uh, IT has changed from being more reactive, where it was like in-person support, hardware support, all that stuff, to post-pandemic world. We're now really supporting our end users in our business through the cloud. And so business technology kind of falls better within that because we're now getting more closer to being cloud oriented. We're more SaaS management than system administration is the best way to put it. And so if you tie that all together, it makes sense for the journey to kind of evolve into business technology. I want to say in my experience, it's definitely grown from like IT to BT. And for
Mhm.
us, really the narrative for us was really driving home where we're not only going to be reactive as we have been, but also being very proactive to where the
Mhm.
business is going. And it's necessary based on where things are going, right? The market conditions, post-pandemic world, the way I want to say companies are learning and changing to operate,
Mhm.
it slowly evolves into that.
It's definitely like, yeah, I think everyone says like, now we're in the post-pandemic world, and it's like the fun, I don't know, the glory days of Silicon Valley are kind of like winding down, or tech, and I'm like, we're just kind of in a retrenchment. So it's like, what do you call it? Certain things are gonna rebound, but right now we're just kind of in the stasis mode that we're in, and I like to be hopeful. Things can only go down so long before they go up. It's like those bar
Yeah.
graphs or whatever you can, not a bar graph, like a stock market. It'll go down,
Yeah. Yep.
it'll
Yep.
go
Yep.
up, and as
Very
it goes
familiar with
up, we'll all
that.
feel a little bit less stressed out, and hopefully like 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, yeah, and for us, it's brought on, at least how I see it, more exciting work in terms of being able to like really change the way IT BT operates as a whole, and like that's what excites me. Is that yes, we're in a condition that I would say hasn't impacted the tech world in quite a few years. And then so now everyone who's kind of joined the tech world, started working, is now experiencing a little bit of a downtrend, and then how
Mm-hmm.
that changes and shifts the business, which also then changes and shifts the mindsets of the way things are planned. And it goes to show like how we've changed and operated from IT to BT, how we're being more proactive, how we're trying to get better aligned and more, I want to say, forward thinking on the way we strategize things. Because all in all, like we talked about it earlier, is like it starts to impact things like saving money and cost. It starts to impact things of like how other teams start to operate, and how like you socialize with these other teams. And then one big thing I think we haven't addressed yet is like morale, right? And like how that starts to shift the company morale, because a lot of folks are so used to being able to use one system, and now we're needing to cut or sunset that system to save budget and money. And so now folks are going to have to change and interact a different way, and how that slowly affects culture and impacts morale.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny how like all those things coupled together has caused BT to think a different way, which we are not used to, and we haven't had experience in, especially if we just started working in the tech world just a few years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a funny mind shift change.
No, absolutely. It's a big, yeah, it's definitely a big shift, but hopefully there is some way to kind of get things on track, staying on
Mhm.
cost, do the stuff, or not negotiate, but also put that value towards business leaders
Yeah,
and make them understand.
yeah, yeah, totally.
I need to pause. My plumbers are replacing my water heater. Give me 1 second.
Dude, you're good. You're good.
And
Hey, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Go
definitely
ahead,
one
Blake.
of the issues is kind of building on that is how do you manage those stakeholders in your organization or just in your experience, like, and there's probably other IT leaders that'd love to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, I think one big one, and like, this is again in the later stage as we matured a lot of our other processes, is we came to terms of trying to follow a framework. And so with a framework kind of came then the mythology behind it. So for us, it was going from a decentralized IT organization to a centralized IT organization. And
Hmm.
then once that fell into place, what normally happens is the IT team starts to then put together an IT steering co, and that steering co then brings in a bunch of other stakeholders and leaders and heads, and I want to say technology movers, from all spectrums of the business together to help kind of decide and prioritize some of the ideas we have brewing, and then also like where the business needs our help. And that so that's one way to do it is essentially a good one. And then I would say what we've done in the past is a lot of socializing.
Mhm.
And this is the same as when I was a consultant or even a contractor to certain businesses. A lot of it had to do with a lot. People are so used to coming to IT for like when they need help, but then not
Mhm.
understanding. You can actually also come to IT to like help build a process, right? It's for us, it's like people, process, technology, right? Like those are the three main
Oh.
things. And so for us, and I want to say in the early stage, one thing is like really hitting that home. Uh, Helped a lot, especially
Mhm.
with technical debt, because now it's like, where's the problem? What are the requirements? And like being approaching every meeting or conversation about it like that, so that when we did have more resources, or when the team did grow, or we know we had time, or there was a situation that occurred that we needed to start prioritizing, we can kind of tail back to all those previous conversations we were talking about, or all those
Mhm.
other big things we needed to build. So it's there. I would kind of put it in as like mature the intake process first there at that point, if you're in that early phase, and then you can be a little bit more methodical and help you strategize around what technical debt looks like, and how
Mhm.
to be more proactive about it is the best way to put it.
Absolutely. And I think it's, framework process. I mean, even in sales or even in, dealing with clients, you want to have a set way of doing things so that it can't get messed up, so that people don't go crazy. Because if you don't have standards and things just kind of grow and mold and you're trying to just kind of manage them as they come, it gets worse over time. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
they had a system here, I mean, at Robert Half before my time, that was supposed to be an equivalent of Salesforce, but they had started it, built it, kept making changes, and it eventually just got to a point where it's like we don't know. It just became like black muck stuck on everything. It's like tar, like we can't really get rid of it, but it's like not working, but it's there. And eventually they just decided to kind of burn it all to the ground. But it was like a combination of years of decision making, probably decades of decision making, that just kind of just got stuck.
kind of
And
build. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where I've worked in a lot of, for several, not a lot, but three different big organizations where they just have a lot of things that they're hoping never break, and they just kind of
Yep.
keep it going, and they keep pushing the cart down the road, but everyone's driving cars. So some of the most large companies you think of in the US, their back end systems are running on things from the 80s and the early 90s, and
Yeah.
it's kind of scary. Even I got a notification. I mean, for folks in the Bay Area, they'll know this, but Patelco sent out a notification to all of us members saying, "Hey, we got hit with a hack, or we got a breach in progress," and I had no
Yep.
idea what it
Yep.
was. Like, and my manager used to be a QA tester, and she was telling me that is a financial software that was developed in the 80s that was phased out in the mid 90s, and like 2001, like nobody, it like went out of business pretty much. So I was unpleasantly surprised to find that my banking institution
Thanks.
is running on some software from the 80s. Yay.
Yeah, yeah. No, you bring up some very strong points there. Like it's kind of the same too, and it's kind of going back to like that whole prioritization thing, where like in the very early days it wasn't so much of a nuisance, and then it like slowly grew and grew and grew, and then now you're like what I like to call kind of stuck with a bag of poop, and now you're trying
Yeah.
to figure out what to do with it. So definitely have seen that before. Like we at I remember a great example of this is like at Slack, where we went from I would say some sort of uh, management on our computers from system to system, whether it was like Jamf, from Intune, the Windows side, same. And what eventually happened is I think we switched tools like 3 or 4 times, and then we finally hired like a really amazing expert on the client platform side, and then that person was really able to build I want to say, monumentous system that really scaled us to the next level, all on a different tool. And like that slowly happens like everywhere. Like even here, there's some legacy systems where I we still kind of talk as a app rationalization team, or a team that's looking at software spend, and say like,
Hmm.
why are we still using that? Why is that still part of the organization? And now that starts to lead into like what we like to call thrash, or like what we call proliferation, where it's like there's multiple apps that do the same thing. And that's
Mm.
another, I want to say, item that ends up becoming technical debt. Is in the very early stages, like the Wild West. Like anyone and everyone can get whatever they want. And then
Yeah.
like the team matures and then you're like, cool, why do we have 10 like project management tools? Why do we have like 4 task management tools? Like,
Yeah.
don't they do the same thing? Why do you have teams in Slack? Like all that stuff. So I think that is part of something that slowly grows, but
Hmm.
then it affects every organization I've been in. I've never been in one where like it was like too late to turn. Yeah, I think I've never been in one and it was like too late to turn the tide, but the moment we needed to turn the tide, I remember that always being like a huge feat. So for us here at Benchling, we were very strategic on, okay, we've seen what big waves can kind of look like based on if we stick to a certain tool. Like this might be a good time to start socializing, or at least having a discussion of what that would look like to evolve that into something else.
Hmm.
And like here at Benchling, to address technical debt, at least specifically from a BT operational side, we're investing heavy in automation. We
Hmm.
really want to build those muscles and build those processes so that our folks can still feel like they get that white glove uh, extraordinary support that we try to provide, but also build somewhat of automation behind it so that all our processes and our systems on the back end all kind of fall in line. And then hopefully that leads into, cool, we have everything we need. This is not really scaling. Let's then decide on maybe we should sunset the tool or go into something bigger. And that's eventually what I think happens years down the line as the maturity comes into the business technology world.
Mm. And I think that's a good kind of message of hope to sort of end on, is like there's usually not a point of, oh, now it's too late, now it can't be done. That's very rare. I mean, that would take
Yeah.
something like the IRS, which still has software running from the 70s. That's the
Who
only
knows?
time
Yeah.
where I'd say, yeah, you just got to burn it down to the ground and restart, which they won't do. It'll
Yeah.
never get fixed. So
No,
unless
definitely, definitely.
unless you're the federal government, or yeah, something like that, you probably can fix your problems. So try and be
Yeah.
hopeful, be proactive, get people involved. I think, don't make everybody feel like they're an outsider, which I'd say that's like an old school mentality. That's not really the norm anymore. I would say
Yeah.
the norm is now folks like you that are like very like, hey, let's get this done. Let's do this as a team. Let's make it happen. And that's what you need, because you can't, there's no such thing as the technology being this side thing and then everybody else just doing their thing. Is just not how the world works anymore. So it's
Oh yeah.
getting
100%.
everyone on the same boat is really important. Yeah.
Yep.
But definitely want to thank you for taking the time out, giving your perspective. And I know that a lot of folks will definitely connect with some of those stories you were sharing.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. Thanks again for having me, Blake. It was fun to be here, and yeah, like looking forward to kind of what the next few years come, especially again post pandemic world, all the changes that are happening, and kind of where we're going towards. So, looking forward to where BT and IT kind of grow from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. Have a great
Yeah,
day.
you as well. See you, Blake.